introduction. So, okay. All right, welcome to the PHONEWORD Forum for Wednesday, June the 25th, 2014. It's approximately 4 p.m. Eastern Time, and today is an open session. So twice a year on the PHONEWORD Forum, we have an open session, which is basically where we can just talk about whatever the topics are that the community wants to talk about. And we do have a few topics that are on the agenda, but we don't necessarily have to cover them. And certainly, so far we have, who just joined?
Hi, Jay, it's Mary Resta.
Hi, Mary, welcome. We have Mike from ATL who's on the line, who's become active in the Future Numbering Working Group.
Yeah, I've worked with Mike. Mike, it's Mary.
I think you might be on mute.
Hello.
Hi. Given what Mike and I are working on, we'd like to hear what you know about the test bed, Jay.
Okay, great. And
I apologize, I'm finishing lunch, so I will be on mute.
No problem. And I'm sorry, the lady who's on from TransNexus, could I get your name again, please?
Valerie.
Valerie.
Bradford.
Okay, great. And I met your, let's see, the founder of your company at the numbering testbed workshop. I believe his name is Jim. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, great. So let's go ahead and get started. We're a couple minutes into it, and a few other folks might join, and we also have a Google Hangout going, and it looks like there's at least one viewer on the Google Hangout. So is there anything, any particular topics you folks would like to cover today? Today's just sort of a summary of some of the highlights of what's happened so far in 2014, any topics that might be of interest to you, anything that we've covered on other PHONEWORD forums, anything in particular you'd like to cover?
Jay, it's Mary, and I'd really like to hear what you've heard as follow-up on the test bed.
Okay. Well, that's certainly, I think, one of the most important topics for us to cover. And so far, I've basically heard nothing, Mary. I mean, other than what we've discussed on the PHONEWORD, or excuse me, on the Future Numbering Working Group, I have seen no communications on the official distribution list that's been set up on the IETF website. You know, basically, we expected to have a summary of the numbering testbed workshop, which is held, for those who might not be familiar with it, it was held on March the 25th, 2014, at the FCC headquarters. There were 80 plus people that were there in person and another 40 or so that were on the conference bridge, and we spent a day-long session talking about numbering, addressing how that impacts the transition from the public switch telephone network, the TDM network, into an all IP environment. We had some great conversations. We explored some general ideas and approaches on how this testbed might be configured. Would there be one registry? Would there be multiple registries? Could those registries federate among one another? Which, frankly, I think that's my favorite approach to setting up not only a testbed, but possibly the operating, numbering, and addressing environment. So we had a great conversation. After that, we did cover for those of you who might not know, we did cover the presentation from the numbering testbed workshop, and that was one of the PhoneWord forums, I think in March. And we went through that presentation. If you're interested, we had some conversation. We had some very good conversation. So that is available on the PhoneWord forum page of PhoneWord.com. And apparently there was a little bit of conversation in early May in Denver at AMOC, which was a conference sponsored by ATIS, the Alliance for Telecommunications Industry Standards, I believe is what the acronym stands for. But since then, there's been an industry group that's formed, an issues management group, which was formed at the request of the North American Numbering Council, and I believe another meetings coming up on that in early July. However, to my knowledge, most people are basically looking for some sort of direction as to, what are the next steps for the numbering testbed workshop. So, Mary, would you say that pretty well covers it? And Mary Redka, by the way, is one of the leaders in numbering and in the industry, and she is with CenturyLink, for those that might not be familiar with Mary Redka.
Thanks, Jay. I would say that there's a lot of effort already underway in a lot of groups. And at the previous Nancy to the one that was held earlier this month, there was a specific direction given to folks to start the work that was assigned to the working group. So, for example, in the FON working group, Mike, who's on from ATL, and I have been involved in a contribution development team to put together a contribution for the Future of Numbering working group. And there's a couple of other Future of Numbering working group subgroups that I've already worked. Inc. has been working with Dr. Schulz-Renee directly on a number of these issues. And I know that the LMPA working group, I believe they meet maybe even next week, or no, it's in July. They're going to have presentations from on enum, from iConnective, and I'm not sure who else is going to be talking to them about enum, but I know that's going to happen.
Okay. And Mary, it's my understanding that Newstar is planning to set up a test bed, and I believe iConnective is, and then I can't remember which of the cable companies, if it's either Cox or Comcast, and then PhoneWord is proposing a test bed as well. Are you aware of any other?
I wasn't aware of what you just said, so can you say more about what you're doing and how you're doing it? Are you filing something with the FCC, or what are you doing?
Well, we filed an indication of interest, and based on what I read in the initial, announcement and request in January, was that at the open meeting of the commission, I think it was mentioned that they were planning to make an announcement in May regarding the test bed and some sort of direction. And that looks like that's been postponed. But, what PhoneWord basically is proposing is an open source test bed that would involve a registry for numbers that would be an enum architecture with registrars that can interface that registry. So initially we were planning to use an existing open source platform that does just that, called FRED, which stands for Free Registry for Enum and Domains, and it's out of the Czech Republic. Well, it was actually built as a collaborative effort by a number of entities, but primarily that's run by the folks that run the Internet registry for the Czech Republic. We were going to use that, and the plans have changed to build from scratch a registry and registrar construct or platform using what I consider to be more contemporary tools. So does that kind of paint the picture of what we've got going on, Mary?
And then would you plan to take that whole package and present it in some filing?
It could be presented in a filing. It could be just run independently. It could be part of a federation of other registries that are part of the test bed, such as Newstar, iConnective, and then the cable operator that's indicated in interest. So we were really looking for a little more guidance before there was a definitive direction on how the PhoneWord test bed would operate. What we've done up until this point is to run some workshops that talk about the architecture, the tool set, and how it might be constructed. And we've been doing 2 workshops per month on the second Wednesday and the third Wednesday of the month, sort of leading up to the point where we could have some actual code available and something that people could actually test out. So does that kind of bring you up to date on what PhoneWord's been doing?
That helps, thanks.
Okay. And there's a little bit of static on the conference bridge. If you folks could please mute until you're ready to talk, that would be helpful. Thank you. So the sense that I get is that there's a lot of interest in the numbering and addressing area. And right now, I would say we could really use some direction from the commission to say, okay, this is what we would like to see. This is the direction we would like you to go. So in addition to those items that have taken place, I know that Dr. Schultzren is working with the IETF along with some other folks, some experts in the numbering area, on some standards for things like identity management and that sort of thing. I believe it's called STIRS. The other thing that's happening that I think is notable, quite notable, is the Commission's been having workshops or reporting sessions in the realm of public safety, in the realm of security, and in the realm of their technology advisory council. And all 3 of those areas continue to focus on numbering. Numbering is a central part of that. So one of the things that I would like to do today is I'd like to replay what I think is a key part of one of those sessions, which was held on April the 17th, and it's about the all-IP transition and public safety. And I apologize for those of you on the conference call because there's going to be a bit of a delay if you're trying to watch this on the PhoneWord.com website. But yeah, I think you'll be able to hear it fine. So if you'll just kind of listen in as I play this clip from the transitions workshop on April the 17th with the FCC. But Richard Shockey, I'm going to play just a short clip from what Richard said at that session, because I think it's really, really key in the realm of numbering and identity management. So bear with me just a moment, and I'm going to screen share this. And okay, so it's up, and with any luck at all, this will work. And if you'll just listen to what Richard has to say, I think it'll be valuable.
Let me start out by saying that what we are trying to do here is to essentially restore the circle of trust between the various entities that represent the communications network of the United States. And this is consumer to service provider to PSAP, PSAP to first responders. That whole chain of trust has been fundamentally broken in multiple ways, and we do actually understand the problem. One of the issues that some of us have been working extensively on is how to restore essentially a notion of identity within the process. I think some of us here in Washington, we saw the reports yesterday at the Washington Post about the IRS caller ID spoofing problem, which is probably the worst incident that we've seen right now. Certainly, staff here at the FCC and the Federal Trade Commission have been worried about caller ID spoofing and identity in communications now for quite some time. And one of the things that I think that we're going to have to look at, not only for managed communication services using telephone numbers, but certainly this process in public safety where from consumer to carrier, from carrier to ESINet, from ESINet to PSAP to first responder, there has to be a way of cryptographically assuring each party to this transaction understands where the call or data is coming from and that it has not been maliciously tampered in the middle in some way, shape, or form. That's one very simple thing that concerns a great deal of us.
So I'm going to stop it right there. And for those of you that are interested, that Richard's comments start at 317 minutes into the day-long session that was held at the FCC and that is available on video at the FCC website, and it's dated April 17th. But it's my view that this caller ID spoofing, the phenomenon that's called swatting, where people are able to spoof a caller ID into a public safety answering point and dispatch police, fire, emergency services to some house or place as a kind of like a prank. All of that is huge. And what Richard was talking about right there is this phenomenon where people are able to spoof caller ID so that people think they're getting called from the Internal Revenue Service, and they are basically being cajoled into paying money because they think they're talking to the IRS, and you know, it's becoming a bigger and bigger problem. So Mary, were you able to hear that okay?
Yes, I was.
Okay. Was that valuable, Mary, to hear that little clip?
Well, yeah, I've heard it before, but you know, I think all of us understand that spoofing is a major concern. There's just no really good cross-modal solution.
Mm-hmm. Well, this notion of identity management, I think, is really, really key in the realm of numbering. So that's one of the things that I think can be tested in this numbering test bed, is a new way to weave in not only identity management but also public-private key pairs for security. So, any other thoughts or comments about that? I'm not sure what else to say about the numbering test bed. There was comment in the June open meeting regarding AT&T's all IP transition proposed trials. But basically what I got out of that was that the commission is just, they certainly didn't give it a stamp of approval. It was more of like an update. And, you know, I guess I was kind of looking for a stamp of approval out of that open meeting, but it didn't really happen. It was more like, we're monitoring this and we want to make sure that the consumers are protected. So that was, I would say, a little bit disappointing as well, at least for me. In the, what is it, I believe on the July agenda of the FCC open meeting, they will be talking about their criteria for funding rural broadband experimentation, which is somewhat akin and part of this all IP transition initiative. But other than that, I think we're just kind of looking for some direction. So, any other thoughts or comments? There was a notice that was issued by the Commission, I believe it was on June 16th, talking about assessing a fee per toll-free telephone number. And I think comments end on that element, I believe, July 7th. I haven't read that whole proceeding in detail, and what I did read was that the fee per toll-free telephone number is a small one. However, that's something very new, I would say, to the industry. Mike, have you heard anything about that?
This is Mike Rothschild.
Yeah, go ahead.
It just so happens that we, Alea Christopherson, set up a meeting with the FCC on the day after that announcement came out. We were with the wireline division and the I think Annie division. I can't recall the other team that was there. But essentially, our goal at that time was to talk about geographic routing of toll-frees. In the end, as kind of a curiosity, we asked that those individuals if what they could tell us about that that notification that came out, and to be honest, they weren't really sure about it. So I'm not sure who within the FCC is operating, kind of which divisions or which teams are kind of operating independently. The consensus as part of speculation was that this was potentially an effort for the FCC to reduce hoarding, but nobody understood, nobody at the FCC could explain concisely to that group of individuals what that ruling, why that ruling came about, or why those fees were proposed, and And so I was a little bit surprised at the lack of communication within the FCC, which I guess I shouldn't be, but I still was. And it's still, everyone is still, from my understanding, still speculating on exactly what the goal of that ticket or those additional fees are. But yes, it's a very nominal fee by comparison to the value of telecom in general.
Yeah, it was a nominal fee, but it was, I mean, it's a fee nevertheless. And it appears to me that the take from the spare pool in the toll-free numbering has slowed down. And you know, one of the things that I'm hearing about a lot now is misdial traffic. People being able to, you know, monetize misdial traffic. And I'm kind of wondering if that's part of the, you know, what was fueling the enormous assignment of toll-free telephone numbers that was happening. So, Mike, have you heard about any industry efforts to respond to this inquiry by the FCC?
No, I have not. The conversations that I had were more about trying to get clarification from them on exactly what, you know, who is imposing the fee and what specifically the additional funds were meant to accomplish. I'm very familiar with people trying to monetize misdials, and have been a part of a lot of different conversations related to that. I mean, the fee itself doesn't. I mean, yeah, possibly it makes it a little bit more difficult to monetize the misdials, but it's all, you know, from my perspective, it's all. Either way, it's hoarding numbers without really a specific intended purpose. It's just kind of, I guess it's an attempt to try and force people to return numbers to the spares pool. I think a part of the issue that we're facing is there's not a lot of clear definition around what is use of a number mean. If I have a number that I am advertising as a part of a marketing campaign, but it's not getting very many calls, does that mean the number is in use or not? There's a lot. There are many different ways to approach the problem that my understanding this fee is designed to solve, but it's still speculation until we hear back from the SEC.
Well, and I think it weaves into the identity management issue as well, because when a number is marked, you know, assigned in the spare pool in the SMS 800 database, assigned to who? And you know, that's still a big missing out of the whole ecosystem there. So, you know, there's no who or for what purpose, and maybe there shouldn't be, you know, a what purpose associated with it, but all of that, I think, is related. So, did somebody else just join? If you'd like to announce yourself, you don't have to, but it sounded like somebody joined. Okay. Any other topics anyone would like to cover today? I'd like to talk a little bit about toll-free broadband, because we've had some experts from around the world on the PhoneWord forum talking about toll-free broadband, and we had Hank Holquist of AT&T on earlier this year after AT&T announced that they would be doing some what they call sponsored data plans. And you know, recently in the news, there's talk about Netflix and some of the cable providers, and certainly the chairman of the FCC is now talking about net neutrality and quality of service for people that have subscribed to, you know, internet services and all that sort of thing. And from past discussions, the concept of toll-free broadband, I think, is still kind of murky, particularly in the realm of, you know, the legacy toll-free industry. And I'll just try to quickly sum it up, and then maybe talk a little bit about where it's at and why I think it's very, very significant to the whole ecosystem. So 30 years ago or so, toll-free telephone numbers were developed, 1-800 numbers, so that people would be more likely to interact with primarily businesses, and they wouldn't have to worry about their long distance charges on the telephone network, because long distance calling used to be a big concern. Still is to some degree. Now, what's replaced that concern about my per minute long distance charges is my data cap. So, for years we enjoyed unlimited data plans on our smart devices, smartphones, tablets, and so forth. What's happening is the appetite for video in particular is really stressing the networks, and there is no real-time natural governing ability to throttle back when people want to watch, SpongeBob SquarePants. I was in a grocery store the other day, and there was a child in a shopping cart with an iPhone watching SpongeBob SquarePants video, real-time video, as his parents are checking out. And people are watching kitty cat videos and all that sort of thing. And there's nothing to throttle back that appetite for data in the current ecosystem. And what the carriers have started to do is to place caps on the consumption of the data, and if you exceed the cap, and it's a fairly high cap at this point, you start to get charged $10 per gig of data that you use. Now, the other thing that's been going on is there's been, you get a fairly fast connection for the first month allocation of data, but then your quote unlimited plan can start to slow down. Well, all this is related to the net neutrality issue that's being talked about, and the Commission has an open comment session going on right now. But what I think is kind of hard to get your arms around in this conversation is that the internet itself is facing a critical point where, unless there is some sort of real-time dynamic incentive set to prioritize the data consumption on the internet, there are experts that are predicting that there's a sort of a breakdown that's ahead of us. And I'm not an expert in that area. However, there's a fellow named Martin Geddes who's been on the PhoneWord forum, who's written extensively about the future of broadband, and he is involved with the technical aspects of why this phenomenon is occurring and why I'll call it the pollution of the internet, cannot be solved by adding more and more capacity. In fact, by adding more and more capacity, the problem just gets exacerbated. So it gets us closer to a kind of a crisis. So in my view, toll-free broadband is a critical part of that, where that looks to me like the best way to introduce a incentive set to throttle back on consumption, and also to put a mechanism in place so that there's at least a community, a business community, that can start to monitor in real time the usage, the priorities, the importance of some traffic over other traffic. And what's developing is a higher volume on the conversation about paid content on the internet, about net neutrality. It was certainly a very heated Open Commission meeting, I believe, in May, when they were talking about net neutrality. People were, people consider their access to the internet as like vital as, access to electricity or water or, any other basic need. So when they start to hear, about paid content or, prioritized content, they get rather emotional about it. However, the underlying engineering problem is that for the internet to continue to be viable, if you believe what Martin Geddes and his colleagues are saying, for the internet to continue to be viable, there has to be this mechanism in place that has a quality of service element to it, a real-time governance, let's say, or throttling that's probably going to be market priced, that all that has to be in place to assure the viability of the internet. And if we indeed transition away from the PSTN, the old copper network, and everything is reliant upon the internet, then this governance, this prioritization is mandatory. So I don't know if that paints the picture of where toll-free broadband fits into the picture as one viable alternative for this governance or not, but I guess that's about the best way that I can articulate it and why I think toll-free broadband is important. Any thoughts or comments?
Well, this is Mike Rothschild again. I certainly am curious. I mean, every concept that you just described as it relates to net neutrality has already been dealt with, worked through on the voice and data side. So back in the day of the PSTN, a network was at risk when someone had a auto dialer or campaign dialing and they're filling up or taking down a switch. And the rules already exist where on the telephony side, if someone's network is at risk, they can take corrective action against the offending party at that moment in time for a period of time until the circumstances remedy themselves. The net neutrality argument it's a way different conversation, and the engineers are trying to, in my opinion, make overly complex a relatively simple conversation in order to justify whatever they're trying to justify, whether it's themselves, their own jobs and roles, or if they're trying to justify some action that their company wants them to take. But nothing on the data side is new. Everything has been dealt with. Everybody just uses different words and tries to make it more complicated than it really is. If you buy a single phone line, I should be able to use that phone line anytime. If I buy a DS3 worth of phone lines, I should be able to use 672 phone lines at the same time. If I buy a T1 of internet, I should have up to a few one of internet available to me. And if I buy a full gig of internet, I should have a full gig of internet available to me. It doesn't matter what data is streaming across that set of infrastructure. Because of cost management and all this stuff, everybody over trunks or over subscribes. Just the nature of the beast. But all of these issues of how you manage the infrastructure, the underlying infrastructure to support those customers, even with oversubscription, those rules have already been defined. It's just they're trying to change the rules in the data world, and for whatever reason. So.
Well, I completely agree with you, Mike, that the approach not only to the net neutrality issue, but also to this identity management is primarily being approached from an engineering viewpoint. And it's my assessment, and again, I'm not an engineer, but I really think that the policy realm and the business model realm are the two legs of the three-legged stool that need to have their representation in this conversation. That the policy and the business models, that's really what's lacking. And as the engineering efforts continue to make it more and more complex, I think those efforts are really pursued in order to avoid what's happening or what needs to happen on the policy and the business model side. I think the other thing too that's important to keep in mind regarding DS3s and T1s and all that stuff is those are much more akin to pipes. And when we're talking about the internet, we're really talking about, as it's been described, like rivers in the ocean or streams in the ocean. And the pipe analogy, the landline, all that, whenever somebody's talking about pipes in the internet, that's usually I think that can really lead one's thinking off track in terms of what's really going on, in terms of the internet architecture versus the TDM architecture.
We're not talking about the architecture of the global internet. We're talking about an individual user's ability to stream data to their specific location at a specific place. So there's a specific end user. If there is a specific end user that has paid for a certain amount of data access to the internet, regardless of whether they're using it for Skype calls or they're using it to stream Netflix, they should have the amount of data that they paid for. And that's I'm not sure what you're from a engineering perspective. The concept is somewhat the same. The technology behind it is obviously materially different, but the concept is still the same. I paid for rights to access a very specific resource, and I should have rights to that resource. Anyway, we can get into the philosophical debate.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And Mike, for you and others that are interested in this conversation, I highly recommend what Martin Geddes has written, because he spent a lot of time about quality of service and how do you measure quality of service, how do you implement quality of service on the internet versus how it's been done in the TDM world. So let's go ahead and leave it at that. I'll break, and any other questions or comments or?
This is Robert Schaefer. I've got two.
Okay.
The first thing I want to say was I believe there are technologies that service providers can and are using for policy management to determine what can be used or not used by their users. And I also think that users have constraints with respect to service provider that they select based on the terms of service that are published by that service provider. So it's not one answer to the questions or generality that seems to be what we're kind of saying about what people can do or not do, or what providers can do or not do. Now, having said that, I'm kind of interested in what Jay started off talking about in terms of a toll-free paradigm for broadband.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Robert. And for those of you that don't know Robert Schaefer, Robert is a person that I consider to be one of the top experts in the world in terms of implementation of enum. He ran the enum trials for MCI, I believe in the UK, as well as other places in the world. So, you know, first of all, thanks for being on, Robert, and I greatly respect your opinion. So the idea is this. Let's assume that you've got two alternatives for consumers to access Netflix. I can put in Netflix.com on my iPad and watch, let's say, The Matrix or Gone with the Wind or whatever. And if I do that, and if I'm off of Wi-Fi, then I've got to be concerned about where am I at in my data plan for the month. Because even though it's, you know, a relatively small amount, it's an amount so that I don't want to be surprised with an extra $10 on my bill or $20 or $30 if I'm watching video on my iPad and I've, you know, been using my data plan. So I can access Netflix and watch videos via Netflix.com, or what if I could dial on my iPad 1-800-NETFLIX and watch the same videos and not have to worry about my data plan consumption. That's what I'm talking about in terms of toll-free broadband. Now the question mark in that scenario that I just laid out is, what is the address that you're going to use? Because right now, the way toll-free telephone numbers are set up, they still rely upon the public switch telephone network and TDM to set up a call, and they are not internet compatible. They're not internet compatible, however, toll-free telephone numbers enjoy a place in the consumer's mind where they trust toll-free telephone numbers for the most part. They understand that if I were to dial 1-800-NETFLIX, then I probably don't have to worry about some sort of usage charges. However, there's this gap that they're not internet compatible at this point. And so that's one of the ways that I, you know, couch this toll-free broadband conversation. I think a more important and more applicable way to couch the conversation is, let's say that I am an Infinity owner. I have a luxury car made by Infinity. Under the scenario I'm talking about, in the future, it would be possible to connect to Infinity.com. Let's say I've taken my car in for service, and the service, my mechanic wants to show me something that's going on under the hood, and could do a web RTC session or whatever, and actually do a video session like a webinar. If I'm connected to Infinity.com, again, I've got to worry about my data plan. If, however, I could dial 1-800-INFINITY and do that same rich media session with my mechanic or a salesperson or whatever, and Infinity Automobiles picks up the tab, I assert that I'm much more likely to connect with them via an address, 1-800-INFINITY, that not only gives me peace of mind about my data expenses, but also might give me a preferred connection. And so there's two value propositions from the consumer side in this scenario that at least I'm talking about. Is number one is peace of mind regarding the expense of connecting in a rich media setting with something like Infinity Automobiles. And number two is that the video streaming that I might experience as an Infinity Automobile owner connecting to Infinity, either my Infinity mechanic or salesperson or the company itself, that connectivity would be a premium connectivity where the video streaming would be cleaner, uninterrupted, not choppy. I wouldn't be competing with the child that I mentioned in the grocery store that's watching SpongeBob SquarePants on his iPhone. And part of that scenario would involve some sort of quality of service agreement between Infinity Automobiles and whatever the appropriate internet service provider might happen to be in that particular area. So does that kind of lay out what I'm talking about in terms of toll-free broadband, Robert? The only question is what's the address going to be? Is it going to be 1-800-INFINITY, or is it going to be infinity.com/toll-free? You know, that's what's up in the air. Right now, AT&T is proposing for this sponsored data plan a particular icon on, let's say, a website, and it's my view that that's problematic.
Well, I haven't thought this through, but I mean, there might be some clean handoff of connectivity that involves DHCP, enum, IP addresses that might facilitate this connectivity, and you could use whatever address you wanted. I mean, it wouldn't have to necessarily be an E164 number.
That's correct. That is correct. It wouldn't have to. Go ahead.
No, I'd say this is Mike Rothschild again, and that plays right back into the conversation we were having at the very beginning, which is what does the future of numbering look like? As it will, you know, a great example is the text enabling of a toll-free number doesn't require any of the voice and traditional backbone infrastructure that exists today, but there are certain parties that want to use the E164 number because they're using it in marketing. If you can find a way to parlay that known string, you know, 1-800 flowers, and give people additional functionality out of that, whether it's, you know, I'll pay for your data plan as you're ordering a bouquet of flowers or you're perusing through the flower options, you know, there's a lot of value that can be added to that. So I don't disagree. Nobody is saying that it has to be an E164 number. There are conversations going on today that talk about how do all these different enum, E164, IP address, how do all of these different addressing mechanisms, how will they be correlated going forward, and which one is going to be used under each of the different circumstances? But obviously, they're going to be commingled. So you might have several different addresses for the same entity, etc.
Absolutely.
But, yeah, I think nobody's really tying it to E164. Everybody's saying we just want to make sure E164 is an option to do all those things as well.
I completely agree. And again, for those of you who might not know Mike, he is one of the three people that are sort of taking the initiative at the Future Numbering Working Group to investigate what would it look like if there were additional addresses that had similar functionality going into the future. So in other words, what if you could enter somebody's email address and effectively use it just like a telephone number, or vice versa? And that I think is also a value proposition use case that's you know, just increasingly becoming important. You know, we've got all these different addresses. We've got Skype names, Facebook names, Twitter handles, multiple email addresses, multiple telephone numbers, all this stuff that we have to manage. And what would it look like if they all kind of worked together and they all had a relationship with one another? And not only that, but what if I had the ability as the end user subscriber to show different communities different sets of options when they try to reach me? So in other words, if somebody dials my cell phone number, what would it look like if I could show them, if it's somebody that I don't know, I show them one set of alternatives like my LinkedIn page, but if it's my family or somebody else, friends and family and whatever, I could show them a different set of options like my Facebook page, maybe my personal Twitter feed, things like that. And we talked about that a little bit at the numbering testbed workshop in DC. This, I believe Dr. Schulz-Rennie referred to it as sort of the Oracle database functionality, so that end user subscribers, us, me, you, everybody who's got a cell phone number in this whole basket of addresses, if we had control over, who saw what out of our set of addresses. So I think that's a really something we'll look back on, 5-10 years from now, and we'll say, wow, it was really difficult when we didn't have any relationship between all our, addresses. Isn't it nice that we've got all these disparate addresses working together, which also starts to play into the single sign-on capability and all that sort of thing. Anything else you can think of along those lines, Mike?
No, absolutely not. It's all being developed, and certainly there's a lot more to be done. Engineering involvement and regulatory policymaker involvement, but I certainly believe the industry's headed in the right direction as it relates to kind of getting ahead of it. And I certainly would encourage everybody on the call to get involved through different organizations, Fawn and Nancy and all that stuff as well.
Yeah, I believe our next Fawn Future Numbering Working Group call is on July 2nd, and you can get information by going to nancy-chair.org and see some of the notes and all that sort of thing in terms of what's going on with the Future Numbering Working Group. And I believe the special interest, the issue management group, will also have some notes posted on there at some point regarding the numbering testbed. So we are at the top of the hour, and is there anything anyone would like to say in conclusion today? I think it was a really good discussion. I appreciate everyone for participating.
Thanks, Jay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Our next PhoneWord Forum will be Wednesday, July 30th, starting at 4 p.m. Again, we are holding workshops for creating the numbering testbed from scratch, open source. and those are on the second Wednesday of each month and the third Wednesday. And you can go to www.phoneword.org to see the schedule, to see some of the conversations, some of the technical side of what PhoneWord's been proposing. And you have, at this point, you got to put in the www.phoneword.org. Got a little glitch in the DNS at this point. And invite you to participate in those if you've got some technical interest. I think we've got an exciting opportunity to create something really, really powerful with some contemporary tools. And you know, we are at a very exciting time in terms of the opportunity set and the transition that's underway from the legacy telephone network into the contemporary all Internet Protocol network. So thank you all for participating, and feel free to contact me if you have any questions or would like any more information on any of these items. All right.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you, Robert. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Mary. Thanks, Valerie.